Section 6. The final argument on human nature. The overall basis of the capitalist monetary market concept has to do fundamentally with assumptions related to human behavior, traditional values, and an intuitive view of history, not emergent reasoning, actual public health measures, technological capacity, or ecological responsibility. It is not a technical approach. It merely assumes that human decisions made through its internal logic and incentive systems will produce responsible, sustainable, and humane outcomes. This is why the monetary market model of economics is considered to be religious by the Zeitgeist movement. Its causal mechanisms are really based on virtually superstitious assumptions about the human condition, with little linkage to the emergent scientific understandings about ourselves and the rigid synergistic relationship we have to our environment and its governing natural laws. When presenting the Zeitgeist movement's solution-oriented train of thought and the technical realities we recognize, for example, the reality that we have the resources and industrial methods to feed everyone on this planet so no one has to starve, most people would agree with the moral notion of doing that, and they would like to see an end to the chronic starvation of about 1 billion people on this planet. However, when the logic runs its course and begins to depict the large-scale social and economic reforms that will be needed to facilitate this, many people react in contempt and reject such reforms. Apart from the stubborn temporal value associations, where people essentially refuse to change anything they have become used to in their lives, there is one argument so common that it warrants preliminary discussion in and of itself. This is the argument of human nature. Are humans compatible with a truly sustainable, scientific socioeconomic system, or are we doomed to live in a world like the one we have now, due to our genetics? While it is clear that humans still appear to maintain hardwired, predictable reactions for raw personal survival, we have also proven the ability to evolve our behaviors through thought, awareness, and education, allowing us in fact to control and overcome those impulsive, primitive reactions if the conditions for that are supported and reinforced. This is an extremely important distinction that separates human beings from the rest of their family of lesser evolved, more primitive species. A quick glance at the diversity in historical human conduct we see throughout time, contrasted with the relatively slow pace of larger structural changes in our brains and DNA over the past couple of thousand years, shows us that our adaptive capacity via thought and education is enormous on the cultural level. It appears that the idea of an unalterable human nature, understood as a universal set of traits and reactions shared by all humans without exception, cannot be held as valid. Rather, there appears to be a spectrum of possible behaviors and predictable reactions which are contingent upon the type of development, education, and conditions we experience. It has been found that environmental conditions, including factors such as nutritional input, emotional security, social association, and all forms of stress, have enormous influences on human behavior in many more ways than previously thought. This process begins in utero, through the sensitive postnatal and early childhood adaptive stages, and then carries on throughout life on all psychological and physiological levels. For example, there is evidence that depression as a psychological disorder can have a genetic predisposition, though it's the environment that really triggers it or doesn't trigger it. So our biological genetic codes do have influence on our personalities, but those genetic codes are very flexible and adaptive, and they change the way they express themselves according to the environmental and social conditions that we exist in. It is critically important to understand this so that we can work to support positive outcomes conducive to public health and safety. Section 6, Part 2. The Changing Condition. The idea of changing society's influences and pressures to bring out the best of the human condition, rather than the worst of it, is at the core of the social imperative of the Zeitgeist movement, and this idea is sadly lost in the culture's social considerations today. Enormous evidence exists to support how the influence of our environment is essentially what creates our values and biases, and while genetic psychological influences can set propensities and accentuations for certain behaviors, by far the biggest influence regarding our variability is the life experiences we have in the cultures we live in, and hence the manner of interaction between our internal psychology and our external environment. In the end, the most relevant issue is stress. We have created an environmental disorder in our culture. The enormity of now unnecessary stress in the world, from debt, job insecurity, and wealth inequality, have created a climate of unease that is increasingly making people psychologically and physically sick. In conclusion, let it be stated that the subject of human nature is one of the most complex subjects there is when it comes to specifics. However, the broad awareness with respect to public health improvements via reducing stress, increasing the availability of quality nutrition, and stabilizing society by working towards abundance and ease is not subject to much debate. We now have some refined truths about the human condition that give us enough evidence to see that we are not only generating poor reactions and habits due to the influence of the current socioeconomic order, we are also greatly disrespecting the habitat as well, creating not only a lack of sustainability in an ecological sense, but also a lack of sustainability in a cultural sense. To think that humans are simply incompatible with these resolutions is to deny the long history of adaptation and enormous cultural differences that we have proven we are capable of.